the Supreme Court has issued a flurry of opinions at the end of its term. Two cases, which seem to be unrelated, read together, give a real insight into the pro-business, anti-individual rights that this Supreme Court is. One of them has to do with Planned Parenthood. The other one, e-cigarettes. My name is Dina Doll with the MeidasTouch Network. Let's break this down. Now, both of the cases have to do with this initial question of whether or not the party bringing the lawsuit is entitled to bring the lawsuit. Do they have a right to sue in court? This is what you can call maybe a procedural question. There's always procedural hurdles that any party to a lawsuit has to satisfy, right? We have things like jurisdiction. Did you bring the lawsuit in the right court, state court, federal court, which state, which county, let's say? Then there's also the question of standing. There may actually have been a harm, but are you the one that was harmed? Are you the one that has the right to bring this case? In this case, both of the procedural questions have to do with a congressional act. The one with Planned Parenthood has to do with a congressional act that was enacted after the Civil War, Section 1983. And it allowed individuals to sue the federal government when the federal government was taking away its rights, its privileges, basically because of what happened with the Civil War and Congress knowing that it was going to be hard for them to enact laws. They gave a redress. They gave individual people, the right to basically hold the federal government to account because they knew the federal government maybe wasn't going to do the right thing always. So they gave them a mechanism for how to protect it. The one with the e-cigarette case has to do with an act that Congress also passed. It is called specifically having to do with vaping. It was a Family Prevention Vaping Act, and it was enacted in order to basically stop the proliferation of vaping because a lot of it was geared toward teenagers. So in both cases, a congressional act allowed for enforcement, let's say, by parties to make sure that the federal government was following the law. So what happened here? In the Planned Parenthood case, this is a case out of South Carolina. And right now, beneficiaries of Medicaid had a right to be able to have any doctor of their choosing as long as it was a qualified provider. That was the language in the Medicaid, that the federal government would give money to the states for Medicaid as long as the states allowed people to be able to pick the provider of their choice as long as that provider was qualified. That was the only mechanism, let's say, that this state had to limit somebody, right? If the person wasn't licensed, then the government didn't have to provide the Medicaid money in order for somebody to go see an unlicensed doctor. The doctor just had to be qualified. And if the state didn't do that, then the federal government could withhold the money. Well, what happened here in South Carolina was the state decided that they didn't want Planned Parenthood to get any of the Medicaid money, despite the fact that they were qualified. This is not a question of whether or not Planned Parenthood providers were qualified. It was just a matter of this trying to basically harm any association with abortion. As we know, Planned Parenthood provides abortion. But this money was not going to fund abortions. This was going to people who use Planned Parenthood as their primary doctors. Well, it turns out 60% of Planned Parenthood's patients receive Medicaid. So this is affecting millions and millions of women. And quite a bit of women use Planned Parenthood as their primary doctor. They use it for things like cancer screenings. They use it because maybe proximity or because they like the doctors. Basically, you shouldn't have to justify why you want the doctor. The law says you don't have to justify it as long as it's qualified. So the individuals sued the state of South Carolina and said, you are denying me the right to choose my own doctor for healthcare in violation of this act that is saying that states, hey, you have to give Medicaid money as long as it's a qualified provider. But the state said that these individuals, this is what they argued basically to the Supreme Court, that these individuals did not have an individual right to sue under Section 1983, despite the fact that clearly they are taking away a right, or at least at minimum a privilege, of being able to use Medicaid money to go see their doctor. Clear deprivation of rights, clear deprivation of privilege. Even if you said Medicaid didn't confer some sort of a right, it certainly conferred a benefit. It conferred a privilege. So this, back in the day, would have been a very easy case for the Supreme Court to decide on the merits, to go past the procedural issue of whether or not the individuals had a right to sue, but to go into whether or not the state of South Carolina deprived them of the right for them to choose their doctor in an illegal way. But the Supreme Court didn't go to that. They decided that no, as it turns out, patients don't have an individual right to sue. The federal government or the state government could deny you Medicaid money. The recourse was for the federal government to not fund the state. Well, when you have a situation like this, really not that different than what the whole purpose of Section 1983 was a distrust, right? There was a distrust that the government was going to do the right thing, which is why it gave the power to individuals to keep them in check. Well, here we have Trump is certainly not going to withhold Medicaid money to South Carolina, and it's not going to be limited to just South Carolina. This is going to be limited go to many, many, many red states. Aging can be tough, especially when you're running around with work and kids. Yes, you may have more wisdom, as they say, but your body sure feels like it's breaking down, whether or not it's not sleeping as well, not having as much energy, being more stiff. Well, I'm so excited to share with you C15 from Fatty 15. It's the first essential fatty acid to be discovered in more than 90 years. It is an incredible scientific breakthrough to support our long-term health and wellness. And as you guessed it, aging and longevity. Fatty 15 co-founder Dr. Stephanie Venn Watson discovered the benefits of C15 while working with the U.S. Navy to continually improve the health and welfare of aging dolphins. Amazing. Based on over 100 studies, we now know that C15 strengthens our cells and is a key longevity enhancing nutrient, which helps to slow biological aging at the cellular level. In fact, when our cells don't have enough C15, they become fragile and age faster. And when our cells age, our bodies age too. This eventually led to studies finding the first new nutritional deficiency in 75 years called cellular fragility syndrome, caused by a lack of the essential fatty acid C15. As many as 1 in 3 people worldwide may have low C15 levels and cellular fragility syndrome. Fatty 15 is on a mission to optimize your C15 levels to help you live healthier, longer. You can get an additional 15% off their 90-day subscription starter kit by going to fatty15.com/mistrial and using the code mistrial at checkout. We are in an era where, depending on where you live, you have different rights. And so Supreme Court, of course, limited it. Justice Thomas, in his concurring opinion, wanted to go even farther and limit that statute even more, making it even harder for people to enforce their rights. Now you have the vaping case, right? Because let's say you want to argue in the opposite and say, the court was trying to stop, let's say, too many lawsuits from coming up. If every individual could sue the federal government, then you're just going to have inefficiencies in the system. You're just going to have too many lawsuits, and you're going to create a system where there's going to be a burden, right, on the justice system. Well, this is why I said in the beginning, you have to read these two together to see really how the Koch brothers have put these really pro-business Supreme Court justices on the court, much more protective of businesses than individual rights. And that's why we've seen erosion of individual rights on the court. So the e-cigarette case, very similar. Here you have RJ Reynolds was trying to get a new FDA approval for a new e-cigarette, and the FDA denied them the approval. So RJ Reynolds would have brought this suit in the DC Circuit or the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals because of where they are located. But those circuits had already denied a similar lawsuit brought by another manufacturer. So they basically knew what would happen if they brought it. So instead, they had a retailer sue under this statute. Sure enough, the retailer was located, they had a retailer and a trade association group. One of them was located in Mississippi, the other one in Texas, because of course now they'll have the Fifth Circuit, which right there you have forum shopping because the Fifth Circuit is the most conservative circuit in the country, which would be the most favorable to a pro-business lawsuit like Reynolds was bringing, certainly. So this retailer brings the lawsuit and says that I was harmed because of the denial of this FDA approval. Even though it wasn't my application to the FDA, I was harmed. So I have a right to bring this lawsuit. And lo and behold, the Supreme Court, who just decided with the Planned Parenthood that that individuals who have a benefit, a privilege, maybe even a right to Medicaid, can't bring a lawsuit, but these retailer and trade association could. They found that the act allowed for anybody within the zone of interest. That broad, the zone of interest. I mean, I think that goes even beyond the retailers, could bring a lawsuit against the FDA in relation to the FDA rejection of the application. So here they have widened, they have expanded the group, the people, the parties able to bring a lawsuit against the FDA. The FDA, of course, as we know, is an agency that is often making decisions against businesses, trying to keep our food healthy and not full of chemicals and keep us safe. And a lot of their decisions go against companies. But this Koch brothers Supreme Court, pro-business Supreme Court, decides to expand the group of people who can enforce and sue the FDA at the same time. I mean, we're talking literally days that they take away people's individual right over the denial of their health care. Perhaps the most basic thing that we need in our lives is health care. So they're telling people they can't have the health care, but expanding the group who can sue the FDA. And this taken together gives us the insight into where the Supreme Court is. And of course, we have the universal injunctions, birthright citizenship decision, which kind of fits into this as well, because as we know, they did not go into the arguments of birthright citizenship. And in terms of universal injunctions, they limited the power of any particular judge. So a judge will only make a decision basically on the parties in front of them. I mean, this is going to have a little give and take as judges figure this out, but that's essentially what they said, was that it's only going to apply to the parties in front of them. So we're going to see a lot more class actions in order to protect people across the country with a single order. But in that case, again, they made it more difficult for individuals to protect their rights, because instead of there just being the one lawsuit where a judge can make a decision, we're now going to have to see multiple lawsuits and in order to make that decision. So in every case, they have made it more difficult for an individual to protect their rights. And then here we see the pro-business making it easier to protect their rights. For even more Supreme Court insight, be sure to free subscribe here on the MeidasTouch channel and check out the Unprecedented show I do every week with Michael Popak on the Legal AF channel, where we focus exclusively on the Supreme Court.
The truth is more important than ever. Check out our new Truth Over Lies collection at store.meidastouch.com. All 100% USA union made.